The recent challenge that you just reviewed and answered a few questions about may have been something that was quite unexpected in your life, or it could have been something that you planned. It could have been something that you perceived as being negative, or it could have been perceived as something very positive in your life. But no matter which category it falls into, the secret to navigating all of these life's challenges and these major changes is personal resilience. The success of the Apollo space program was really credited to the fact that it was led by resilient leaders. The leaders of the Apollo program exhibited all of the characteristics of a resilient person, and that embodied the entire space program. And just like the leaders of this Apollo space program, you too can become a more resilient person by working on each one of these personal characteristics that will make you a more resilient person. So what we're going to do is we're going to spend the next several videos walking through each one of the 7 characteristics of personal resilience. I know that's a lot, but as you see, as we'll walk through it, we'll put it together in a way that will make sense to you and it will flow logically. The first characteristic is positivity. Now, you may be thinking, are you kidding me? Really, Dan? Positivity? And in fact, yes, it is. As a matter of fact, let's consider this for a moment. 1 in 6 Americans takes antidepressant medication. That's a sobering fact. And when you think about that, really a lack of positivity, or negativity, if you will, is a national health crisis. There are a lot of things behind this, a lot of things causing this. We're going to get to the root of some of it in a few moments and how we can become more positive and not allow this to become a major problem in our lives. Well, we're going to define positivity as an ability. The ability to find hope and opportunity in challenging situations. Now, let's talk about the Apollo space program. Could you imagine it's the early 1960s and you're trying to put together and organize a space program with very slow and hard to use computers, no email, no cell phones, really no technology, and you're trying to design rocket ships and flight paths and orbit plans to go out into outer space. In fact, to give you an idea of the lack of technology, today's iPhones are 5 billion, that's with a B billion, times faster than the fastest supercomputer in 1961. So they had a significant handicap. However, they moved forward with the program. But beyond that, the start of the program was really not a great start. It was quite horrific. They had their first test launch in January of 1967. All 3 of the astronauts suited up, and they were going to go through all of the sequences for launch without launching. So the astronauts suited up, and they entered the space capsule, and they latched the door behind them, and then they began the launch sequence, which included filling the launch capsule with pure oxygen where the astronauts were located. Well, somewhere along the line, there was a spark, and unfortunately, it ignited the pure oxygen in the capsule, and because there was no latch on the outside of the capsule, and the astronauts were so overcome by the heat and the flames of the ignition, they were not able to get out of the capsule. And tragically, they all died that day and were burned to death. Well, the leaders of the program at that point, you couldn't blame them. They could have just overcome by fear and the potential danger and what could happen in the future. They could have just stopped the space program at that point. And maybe they should have, but they didn't. The main leader of the program, Gene Kranz, the flight director, he saw an opportunity to move forward despite the tragedy that they had experienced. And he called together the entire team and he addressed them. And that began the path for success for the Apollo space program. Let's take a minute and listen to Gene Kranz in his own words, what he said to the Apollo space program after this tragedy.
The morning after the fire, Gene Kranz speaks to the team. Decades later, he can still recite the words from that day.
Spaceflight's terribly unforgiving of carelessness, incapacity, or neglect. I don't know what the Thompson Committee will find as the cause of this accident, but I know what I find. We were the cause. The simulators weren't ready. Our software and mission control didn't function. Procedures weren't complete. Nothing we did had any shelf life. And no one stood up and said, "Damn it, stop." Now, from this day forward, mission control will be known by two words: tough and competent. Tough meaning we will never again shirk from our responsibility because we're forever accountable for what we do or what we fail to do. Competent will never again take anything for granted. We'll never stop learning. When you leave here today, you will write these two words, tough and competent, on your blackboard, and they will never be erased. They will serve as a constant reminder to the sacrifice of Grissom, White, and Chaffee. That's all.
Well, I'm not sure what you're thinking after watching Gene Kranz. He's one tough guy. But I feel inspired. I feel inspired to see opportunity and hope in really the darkest days. And I hope you are too. But you may be saying, I'm a realist. Dan, I'm just kind of naturally negative. I see things that way. And I get that. But let's consider what we just saw. A group of people were directly responsible for the deaths of 3 of their colleagues. And somehow, one of those people stepped forward and saw opportunity in the darkest of days. So choosing positivity or choosing negativity, it's a choice. It's a choice that we all can make. And when you think about resilience, I want you to think about each one of these characteristics being like a muscle. And the more you exercise that resilience muscle, the stronger it gets over time. And it becomes strong in a way that it becomes a habit. And so if today your positivity muscle is a little on the weaker side and you struggle with this, the more that you exercise your positivity, when something happens, you're more likely to see hope and opportunity versus seeing fear. So now let's get really practical. What are some things that you can do to start developing and exercising this positivity resilience muscle? Well, one of the things you can do is to develop a habit of every time that you feel that you're being negative or you have a negative thought, is to practice this 3-step process. The first step is to become aware, and that's really just to recognize that you're having a negative thought, and that's okay. Just realize that you're having it. Become aware of your negative thoughts. Second, just to say stop. Tell yourself to stop it. Take captive every thought that you have, and if it's a negative one, just stop it, because negative thoughts tend to spiral out of control. A negative thought will breed a negative thought and another negative thought. So we have to tell ourselves to stop it. And then lastly, it's important to ask for help. First, I feel like we need to go to God and pray and ask for peace and help in our lives to see things differently, to see the situation in our life differently, and also to go to people in our life that we know that tend to be very positive, and to go to them and say, hey, I'm going through this thing. I'm going through this challenge in my life, and I'm seeing it this way. And you know those people, they'll tend to see things, in a very different way. I like to call those people my rainbows and lollipops friends. So go through that 3-step process and just begin that and begin to exercise that muscle. I think it's also important that we remind ourselves to look up towards a brighter future. When things happen in our life that are very unexpected and very challenging, or things that we don't tend to choose, then we start to look down, and we begin to carry a heavy load. And instead, I think it's important to say, yes, this is happening today, but to look upwards and to look towards the future and be hopeful. And then lastly, and maybe most importantly, in today's world, we are surrounded and bombarded by so many messages, whether it's television or social media, or people in our lives as well. But we have all these messages that we're receiving, all these thoughts that are entering our mind. And we need to be really careful of what's entering our minds. And for those things that tend to be polluting our minds with negative thoughts, negative information, I think it's important that we kind of start to turn off those sources of negativity in our life. If that's social media, if that's some news that you're watching, or if that's a friend that you have, you may want to consider how that's impacting you in a negative way and start to evaluate that, and instead replace those negative sources with positive sources. If Facebook is a source of negativity for you, maybe you need the YouVersion Bible app for a source of positivity in your life. So just look for opportunities to replace those negative sources in your life with positive ones. So we do have an activity for you following this section. I would like you to spend a little bit of time with this activity and start to exercise that positivity muscle. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.